There's something hidden inside this story, something most people never stop to question. A familiar story can quietly start to fall apart when you realize something inside it was never questioned. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. Picture this: ancient Jerusalem, stone steps, quiet air, a teaching that has shaped how millions understand the idea of entering God's kingdom. You've probably heard of the Eye of the Needle Gate, a small gate in Jerusalem's walls. A camel forced to its knees, burden removed piece by piece, struggling through a narrow passage. It always sounded clear, even comforting, like salvation was difficult but still manageable. That gate never existed. Jesus wasn't describing a clever architectural image. He was describing something far more unsettling, an impossibility. And that is exactly why the disciples reacted with total psychological collapse. With man, this is impossible, but with God, all things are possible. Hey everyone, for a long time I believed that gate existed. I really did. It made the entire theological equation work. Sunday school presented it like a beautiful paradox: humility, letting go, a camel forced to its knees, burden removed piece by piece, squeezing through with everything stripped away. It felt true because it felt possible. And then the historical reality hit me. That gate was never real. Not in Christ's days, not in the centuries that followed, not in archaeology, not in documentation. It's a complete historical ghost invented centuries after the Gospels were written. My immediate instinct? I pivoted. Maybe camel was a Greek scribal error. Maybe it was camelos, a thick rope or cable. That would make more sense. Another way to make it solvable. I spent an embarrassing amount of time in that linguistic rabbit hole. Greek lexicons, textual variants, convinced the answer was hiding in some detail I'd overlooked. But the problem was simple. I was trying to solve a puzzle that was never meant to be solved. I was engineering my way around a truth instead of facing it. The real shift came when I realized I wasn't alone. There was a profound pattern across centuries of Christian thought. The same instinct recurring again and again. To make the impossible feel manageable, to soften the blow, to preserve human agency. The turning point came when I opened the Babylonian Talmud, that vast, intricate compendium of Jewish law, wisdom, and interpretation spanning centuries. Buried deep within a rabbinic discussion about dreams and their prophetic significance, I found something that completely reframed the entire gospel passage. In ancient Jewish tradition, when the rabbis wanted to describe something utterly impossible, an idea that was fundamentally absurd, a thought that violated the laws of nature itself, they employed one standard, instantly recognizable phrase: an elephant passing through the eye of a needle. This expression appears explicitly in Barakoth 55b and again in Bava Metzia 38b. It was the recognized Jewish idiom for the absolutely inconceivable. It was never meant to be literal. It was extreme, almost comical hyperbole. Language designed to hit like a sledgehammer. The exaggeration itself was the entire point. The shock value was the message. Jesus, standing in a region where elephants were not a common sight, speaking to an agrarian Jewish audience, adapted that exact cultural formula. He didn't invent a new riddle. He localized the proverb. He substituted the elephant, which his listeners had never seen, with the largest, heaviest, most cumbersome burden-bearing animal they knew intimately: The camel, the one that carried their goods across deserts, the one that defined commerce and trade in their world. He was using a cultural inside pattern to deliver a theological shock that would cut straight through their confidence. And his listeners understood it instantly. They knew exactly what he was saying. But here's what nobody tells you. If Jesus was using a known Jewish expression, a cultural formula his audience already recognized, then why did generations of Christians eventually invent a gate? What made us need to fix something that was never broken? The early church fathers wrestled intensely with this passage from the very beginning of Christian interpretation. Origen in the 3rd century, John Chrysostom and Cyril of Alexandria in the 4th and 5th centuries. In all their vast commentaries and theological writings, they never mention a gate, not once, not a single reference across centuries of careful exegesis. They didn't need one. They possessed the spiritual and intellectual fortitude to sit directly in the tension of Christ's raw, unmediated words. Jerome himself, when the gate theory later emerged, called it silly and false. But as the centuries rolled forward, something shifted in Christian consciousness. The human heart proved too fragile to sit with that level of absolute helplessness. The softening began as early as the 2nd century. Clement of Alexandria reframed it as inner attitude, spiritual poverty instead of material loss. It made the teaching survivable for the educated elite. It made Christianity livable for the powerful. And because it was comfortable, because it offered a way to keep your possessions and your sense of control, the compromise spread like wildfire through institutional Christian thought. Then, centuries later during the medieval period, a Byzantine commentator named Theophylact introduced an entirely fabricated piece of historical fiction, a small gate called the Eye of the Needle. A completely practical, completely unauthorized workaround to an agonizing theological truth. And with that single stroke of a pen, cosmic impossibility was downgraded to mere operational difficulty. A crushing spiritual reality was transformed into a human self-improvement project. Modern archaeology and textual scholarship are absolutely consistent on this. There is zero historical, archaeological, or geographical evidence that any such gate existed in Jerusalem prior to the Middle Ages. This is documented fact. Think about that weight for a moment. For over 1,000 years, believers have had their texts reshaped by teachers trying to make the impossible feel manageable. But if we invented a gate that never existed, what else might we have softened? What other hard truths did we turn into comfortable stories? But here is where the entire mystery unlocks. Once you realize this was divine hyperbole, everything changes. The disciples weren't puzzled by a metaphor, they were horrified. Because if the people everyone assumed were closest to God, the wealthy, the religiously observant, the successful, if they couldn't enter the kingdom, then who possibly could? In their 1st century Jewish understanding, wealth was a sign of divine favor. The prosperous were supposed to be secure. If the impossible applied to them, what hope existed for anyone else? Their entire generational theological framework collapsed in that instant. They looked at each other in absolute terror. And that's exactly the question Jesus wanted them to ask, because he was about to answer it in a way that would dismantle their entire understanding of how salvation works. Jesus looks directly into their panic. He doesn't reassure them with myths about gates. He confirms their worst fear directly. With man, he states clearly, this is impossible. He forces them to sit in that dark room of human impossibility. He lets that terrifying reality breathe and settle and sink in. Only then does Jesus finish the sentence, "But with God, all things are possible." That's the point. The camel was never about teaching people how hard salvation is. It was about showing them they could never save themselves in the first place. The needle wasn't a challenge to overcome. It was a boundary that couldn't be crossed. Not through effort, not through understanding, not through religious achievement. The hyperbole stripped away every illusion of self-sufficiency, so that the only thing remaining standing is absolute, unmerited dependence. Not human striving, dependence. No one is uniquely excluded from God's kingdom, and no one is uniquely capable of earning their way in. The billionaire and the beggar, the scholar and the illiterate, the religious professional and the skeptic, they stand at the exact same coordinates before God. There is no hierarchy of approach. There is no back door for the smart or the powerful. Salvation, viewed from the perimeter of human potential and human effort, is not merely difficult. It is a cosmic impossibility, an absurdity on the scale of threading a beast through a needle. And perhaps that is the exact truth we have spent centuries desperately resisting. We keep trying to manufacture a smaller camel. We keep trying to rebuild a gate that never existed, because we cannot bear the radical nature of our own helplessness. We want to believe that if we just work hard enough, understand enough, sacrifice enough, somehow we can earn our way into God's presence. But the ancient invitation was never to figure out how to squeeze through on your knees. It was never to solve the puzzle. The invitation was to completely surrender the attempt, to lay down every tool, every strategy, every achievement, and admit our complete spiritual bankruptcy. There is no secret gate. There is only a needle. There is no hidden workaround, no clever theological trick, no path of least resistance. And maybe that is exactly why our hope was never in our ability to squeeze through the eye. Our hope was always in the outrageous, unmerited grace of a God who specializes in doing what cannot be done. And that single truth changes absolutely everything.